The first story is about naming things. Naming things is very important, especially the things you fear. Because when you name them, it's like magic. They kind of disappear. I can't tell you what this story is called because finding the name is what it's all about. And this is how it happened. Once there was a woman, and she baked 5 pies, and when she pulled them out of the oven, the crusts were so hard you couldn't eat them. And so she said to her daughter, "Daughter, put them there pies up on the shelf so they'll come again." Well, what she meant was they would come soft so you could eat them. But the daughter was a gatless girl, and she thought, if they'll come again, I'll eat 'em now. And she did, first to the last. That night, at supper, her mother said, "Daughter, go fetch me one of them pies. I'll warrant you they've come again." And the girl went back. There were the empty pie pans just as she left them. And so she came back and said, "No, they've not come again." "Well, come or not, I'll have the best for my supper." "Best or worst, you can't have one till they've come again, and I've ate them all." Oh, her mother was that undone. She took her spinning wheel to the door of the house, sat down, and begun to spin. And as she spun, she sang her troubles to the world. "My daughter ha ate 5 pies today. My daughter ha ate 5 pies today." Wouldn't you know it? You sing your troubles and the roars them. Who should be coming down the road but the king of the country himself? "What is that you're singing, my good woman?" Well, no, she didn't want the king to know that her daughter had eaten 5 whole pies, so she changed the words and sang it this way. "My daughter has spun 5 skeins today. My daughter has spun 5 skeins today." "Stars of mine," said the king. "I didn't know anyone could spin 5 skeins in a day these days. Look you here, good woman, I need a wife. I'll marry your daughter, and for 11 months of the year, I'll give her all the food she wants to eat." "Whew, that'll be a fair amount," thought the woman. "And I'll give her all the clothes she wants to wear and all the company she wants to keep. But on the 12th month, she will have to give me 5 skeins a day, else I'll have to dispose of her one way or another, as most kings do." Well, the woman wasn't even listening to him. All she could think of was her daughter to be a queen. "I'd be honored, sir," she said. And he said, "Well, go fetch her." And so she went and got the girl, and the girl got up behind the king and rode off with him to the castle. Now, he was good to his word. He gave her all she wanted to eat, and he was amazed at her appetite. And he gave her all the fine clothes she wanted to wear, and her friends beat a regular path up to the castle and back. She was having such a wonderful time, she thought he'd forgotten all about the skeins. But, my dears, come the last day of the 11th month, the king came and got her and took her to a room in the palace that she had never seen. Opened the door, and there it was, the spinning wheel and the spinning stool, and one window high up and nothing else. And he said, "My dear, tomorrow you'll be brought here, be given flax and victuals, for I know how you love 'em, and you shall spin me 5 skeins in one day." And then he kissed her on the forehead and went off. She went back to her room. She sat down on the side of her bed, and she began to weep. She was such a gatless girl, she didn't even know how to spin, much less spin 5 skeins in one day. Now, in the midst of her crying, she heard a knocking sound, low-like, at the door. So she up and opened it. And there was this little man, if man he was. He had a tail. I tell you, he had a tail, a long, skinny tail, and it went round as he talked. He had big black eyes, and he looked up at her and said, "What you crying for?" "It won't do any good to tell you."
You don't know that.
That's true. If it won't do any good, it won't do any harm, and goodness knows I need somebody to talk to. And so she told him all about the pies and the skeins, and that said,
Tell you what I'll do. I'll come in the morning. You give me the flax. I'll bring it to you spun at night.
That'd be rare wonderful. But what will be your part?
When I bring the flax all spun at night, I will give you 3 guesses as to what my name is. At the end of the month, if you haven't got my name, then you will be mine.
She thought, in a month's time she could get that's name. There weren't that many names in Christendom. Done, she said, and away he went. So, the next morning the king came and got the girl, and he took her to that room, opened the door, showed her the victuals, showed her the flax, gave her a kiss on the forehead, and away he went, locking the door behind him. She sat down on the stool, and she began to weep once more. Suppose the little man didn't show up. Suppose it was all a dream. In the midst of her crying, she heard a noise at the window. She up and opened it, and there he was, out on the window ledge.
Give me the flax.
She handed him the flax, and away he flew. So she sat down on the spinning stool, crossed one leg over the other, and began to think of names. The day went past, and there was a knock at the window that evening. She opened it, and there he was, with the flax all spun as fine could be. He said,
What's my name?
Oh, could it be John?
No, 'tain't.
Well then, maybe it's Harry.
No, 'tain't.
Well, I think you look like a Timothy.
No, 'tain't.
And away he flew. Well, the king came in, and he was glad to see the skeins all spun. He didn't really want to dispose of his wife one way or another. And so that is how her life went for that month. Every morning that imp came and got the flax, and in the evening he would bring it back, all spun, and she would guess his name. And she guessed, and guessed, and guessed, until it came but 2 days left in the whole month, and she still hadn't got its name. That night, it came to the window with the flax all spun, and when it looked at her, its eyes fair glowed, and it said,
What? Hasn't you got my name yet?
Oh, dear. Could it be Spindleshanks? As you can see, she's run out of names.
No, 'tain't.
Well, how about Skinny Tail?
No, 'tain't.
Oh, how about Tremblechin?
No, 'tain't. One more night and you'll be mine.
And away it flew. Oh, she felt fair horrible. It would be dreadful to live with that the rest of your life. The king came in, and that night when he found the skeins all spun, he said to her, My dear, you've had the skeins spun every night, and I'm sure you'll have 'em spun again tomorrow night. I'll eat in here with you this evening. He had dinner brought. Well, he sat down and ate with good appetite. The girl had none at all. In the midst of the dinner, Oh, my dear, I wish you'd been with me this day. I was out in the forest and I heard the sound of singing. Well, you know how I love singing. That's how I met you. I got off the horse and walked over to what looked to be a chalk pit. And there, down in the pit, was a little man. He had a tail. I tell you, he had a tail. And it went round and round. And as he spun, for I tell you, he was spinning, he sang a song about his name. Let me see if I can recall it. Oh, yes, do please recall it, she said. Let me see. Oh, yes. Nimmy, nimmy, not. My name is Tom Tit-Tot. The girl was so filled with joy she rose in the air and hovered in the air, and then she came back down. She fell to eating her dinner with good appetite. Now, the next morning, when that imp came, she kept her eyes down so as not to give it away, but she could feel him grinning. And that evening, when he came back with the flax all spun, he sprang into the midst of the room. And his eyes were glowing like coals, and his tail, his long skinny tail, was going around so fast it was like a buzzsaw. And he said,
"What? Hadn't you got my name yet?"
"Oh dear, could it possibly be, Solomon?"
"No, 'tain't."
"Well, how about Methuselah?"
"No, 'tain't, and more guess, and you'll be mine."
It held its little hands out toward her, and the girl took one step back, pointed her finger at that imp, and said, "Nimmy, nimmy, not, your name is Tom Tit-Tot." Ow! Away he flew. She never saw him again. And the last time I saw that girl, she was dressed in fine clothes, keeping fine company, and throwing 12 apple cores over her shoulder. This story is from Ireland, and this is the way it happened. Once there was a widow, and she had a son named Jack, and all they had to their name were 3 cows, but they lived together well and happy, until the potato crop failed. Things got really bad. Poverty looked in at the door. Things got so bad that the widow said to her son, "Jack, you'll have to take the branny cow to town tomorrow. Sell her and bring home something to lift my heart entirely." "Never say it twice, Mother," says Jack, says he. So in the morning he takes a stick in his fist, turns out the branny cow, and off to town he goes. Now, when he gets to town, he sees this great crowd of people all gathered in a circle, and being a curious lad, he goes over and looks in, and there's this little man, no taller than he had to be. Had a little deeshy-doshy jacket and a deeshy-doshy hat, a red one, and the strangest assortment of animals you ever did see. He had a bee and a harp, an Irish harp, if you will, a mouse, and a bumclock. Now I can see by the good thinking, a bumclock, that's a clock that won't run. Oh no, my friend, a bumclock in Ireland is nothing in the world but the housewife's terror, a cockroach. Well, the wee man sets the animals down upon the ground, starts to pat his foot, and then a very strange thing happened. The bee stands up and begins to play the harp. The mouse and bumclock stand up and take hold of each other like they hadn't seen each other in a couple of weeks. And the pots, the pans, the wheels, the reels, Jack and the cow, the men, the women, the boys, the girls, all begins to jump and jig and dance about, inside in, outside out, upside down, all about, all over the place they went. Oh, what a dancing time they had. And then the wee man reaches down and takes hold of the animals and puts them in his pocket. And then everyone stood around, put their arms around each other's shoulders, and laughed like they hadn't since before they was born. Now the wee man turns around to Jack and says,
"Good morning to you, Jack. How'd you like to have these animals?"
"I'd like it fine. That's the greatest group I ever saw. No money. All I've got's this cow. I brought her to town to sell, to bring home some money to lift my mother's heart entirely."
"Well, now, Jack, I'll give you the bee and harp for your cow, and when you take it home, your mother will laugh if she never laughed in all her life before."
"That's surely true," says Jack, says he. So he doesn't do a thing in the world but turn over the branny cow to the wee man, who goes off with her, and Jack goes home with a bee and a harp in his pocket. When he gets home, his mother says, "Jack, did you sell the cow?" "Aye, Mother," he says, "I did." "Oh, how much money did you get, son?" "Well, Mother, I didn't exactly get money, but I got value." "What are you talking about, son?" Well, he whips out the bee and harp and sets it down on the kitchen floor. And the wee thing sits down and begins to play. The pots, the pans, the wheels, the reels, Jack and his mother, the table, the chair, the house itself all begins to jump and shake and dance about. Inside in, outside out, upside down, all about, all over the place they went. Oh, what a dancing time they had. Oh! When Jack thought his mother had had enough, he reaches down, picks him up, put him in his pocket, and he and she stand there and laugh until the tears run down their face and out the door. But suddenly, his mother gets a hold of herself and says, Jack, you've done a foolish thing. You took my good brandy cow to town and brought home a bee and harp. Now, I'll admit it's a talented little fella, but we can't eat bee and harp for supper, she said. There's nothing to it. You'll have to take the black cow to town tomorrow and bring home something to lift my heart entirely. Never, mother, says Jack, says he. So in the morning he turns out the black cow, and off to town he goes. And when he gets to town, there's the crowd of people you'll not be surprised to know. And there in the midst of them is that little man. And he's got the mouse and the Bumclock, which he sets down upon the ground and starts to pat his foot. The pots, the pans, the wheels, the reels, Jack and the cow, the men, the women, the boys, the girls all begin to jump and shake and dance about. Inside in, outside out, upside down, all about, all over the place they went. Oh, what a dancing time it was. And the wee man snatches up the animals. Everybody stands there and laughs until all the leaves fall off the trees. And then the wee man turns to Jack and says, I'm glad to see you this morning, Jack. How'd you like to have the rest of these animals? And Jack says, I cannot. Why cannot you? Because I've got to sell the black cow and bring home something to lift my mother's heart entirely. The bee and harp didn't quite do it. Well, now, Jack, if you take home the mouse, and I'll give her to you for your cow there, you know your mother's gonna laugh if she never laughed in all her life. And Jack wanted the mouse so bad that he turned the black cow over to the wee man, and he goes off with her, and Jack goes home with a mouse in his pocket. When he gets home, his mother's sitting out on the porch, and she says, Oh, Jack, did you sell the cow? Yes, Mother, I did. Well, show me the color of your money, boy, she said. Well, he reaches in his pocket and brings out the mouse and the bee and harp and sets him down on the ground, and he starts to pat his foot. And the pots, the pans, the wheels, the reels, Jack and his mother, the table, the chair, the house itself, all begins to jump and shake and dance about. Inside in, outside out, upside down, all about, all over the place they went. Oh, what a dancing time they had. Well, Jack, he snatches up the animals, and he and his mother laugh till they fall on the floor. But suddenly she picks herself up, shakes herself off, and turns to him and says, Jack, you've done it again. You've taken my good black cow and traded her for this, well, we don't even know what we're going to eat, and you bring home another mouse to feed. She must have been feeling really bad, or she'd never have made such a bad joke. Well, now, Jack, she says, you're going to have to take the last cow I've got. And if you don't bring home something to lift my heart entirely, I don't know what we'll do. Yes, Mother, says Jack. In the morning, he turns out the last cow. And when he gets to town, standing there on the hill, he looks down and sees the crowd of people. He turns to the cow and says, I wonder what they're looking at. And the cow, being an intelligent beast, does not answer, not wanting to get mixed up in the whole mess. Down they go, and there's the wee man. And he's got just the Bumclock, which he sets down. Now, the pots and pans and the wheels and reels all do their thing, and there's the laughing. And the wee man turns to Jack, and he says, Jack, you'd better have this Bumclock, for it's a very fine thing to have, and besides, then you'll have the whole set. And Jack didn't do a thing but turn over the last cow. The wee man went off with her, and Jack goes home with the Bumclock in his pocket. When he gets home, he sets him down on the kitchen floor, and the pots and pans and wheels again. And there was the laughing, but all of a sudden his mother's in the corner with her apron over her head, and she's weeping her eyes out. Jack can't stand that sight, He goes out and sits on a stone in the midst of the road, and along down the road comes an old woman.
Good morning to you, Jack. What are you doing here? Why aren't you off trying for the King of Ireland's daughter?
What are you talking about, good woman?
Are you the only one who doesn't know? The King of Ireland has a daughter, hasn't laughed in 7 years. He says anyone can get 3 laughs out of her will get her hand in marriage and half his kingdom as well.
If that's true, it's not here I should be, says Jack, says he. When he runs in and gets his cap and his animals, he comes out and gives the old woman a kiss, straightens her back forever, and he goes running down the road at a fast clip. Now, when he gets close to the castle, he comes to a screeching halt, so to speak. For my friends, stuck up on stakes all around that castle are human heads. Jack says to a guard who's standing there, I wonder if you could tell me whose heads those are. And the guard said, Them's the ones who come and tried and failed. A mighty big crowd, says Jack, says he. But he takes his courage in his fist and sends word another had come to try for the prince's hand. Well, the horns blew, and the king and the queen and the court all come out, and the princess too, and they sit in little waiting for another beheading. Well, Jack, he takes a string and he weaves it around his wee friends and takes the end in his hand and walks in front of them. When the king and queen see Jack, they set up a laugh, and the princess turned to see what they was laughing at. And when she sees Raggedy Jack with his little menagerie, she laughs so loud you could hear her over in England. That's one part of you won, my lady, says Jack, says he. One free for nothing. And then he turned to his friends and he said, Do your stuff, fellas. This is the most important job you ever played. He gave a stone to the bee to sit upon, and the bee swept back its wings and sat down concert style. And then the mouse and Bumclock stood up, dropped a low bow to the royalty, turned toward each other, threw their arms up like they hadn't seen each other in 200 years. And the pots, the pans, the wheels, the reels, Jack and the queen, the king, the court, all begins to jump and cheek and dance about, inside in, outside out, upside down, all about, all over the place they went. Oh, what a dancing time. Laughed so loud you could hear her in America. And Jack dropped a bow without missing a beat. That's 2 parts of you won, my lady, says he. And the band kept playing, and the dancing kept on, but there was no more laughing. And Jack's starting to feel a little warm around the collar, if you know what I mean, when all of a sudden, the mouse did a fancy step, turned on its heel, swept its tail through the Bumclock's mouth, and the wee thing started to cough. When the princess saw and heard the Bumclock coughing, she laughed so loud, you couldn't hear her, but the sound of it went clean around the world. Everywhere it went, people began to dance and sing, and by the time it came back, it was so full of joy, it knocked everybody off their feet. Jack got up, brushed himself off. That's 3 parts of you won, my lady, I have you all. They took him in and dressed him in white satin, and when she took a look at him, she says, I'll have him for my husband. The wedding lasted 9 days and 9 nights, and before we left that place, they gave us brogues, broth, slippers of bread, and we came home dancing on our heads. The next story is about a young girl, and it happens in a cottage. In the cottage there is a man and his wife and too many children and not enough food. And so the man and his wife took the 3 youngest into the forest and left them there. And the youngest of the 3 was Molly Whuppie. She was very clever, and this is her story. Well, there they were in the midst of the forest, and night coming on, and all the creatures were beginning to call. Ooh. It was rare scary. Molly Whuppie and her sisters ran this way and that. Finally, beyond a great evergreen, they saw it. There was an enormous castle. It was filled with lights. It looked to them like the castle in Spain. Now, they couldn't reach the door latch, so they threw pebbles up against the door, and the door creaked open, and there stood a large woman. "Lasses, what in the world are you doing here?" "We're tired and lost. Will you let us come in?" "Law, lasses, my husband's a giant. He'll kill you." "Oh, please let us in. We'll warm and then we'll leave." So she let them in, and they sat by the fire, and she gave them pancakes and milk to drink, and they were kind of warm and sleepy, when suddenly they heard him coming, old, tall, dark, and ugly. And he said that rhyme that all of us know. "Fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of earthly ones." And his wife said, "No, they're just 3 lost lasses. You'll not harm them, and sit down and eat your supper." And he did, because even giants do what their wives tell them to sometimes. Well, he ate 12 whole oxen, and 65 roast pigs, and 350 fried chickens, and 600 fish, popping them down like popcorn. And then he picked up a cask of cider and gargled it down and burped so loud he broke all the windows in the castle. And then he turned and he looked at the strange lasses. "You'll stay the night." And they nodded their heads like so many apples bobbing. Now, the giant had 3 daughters of his own. Before he sent them all up to the garret, he put beautiful gold necklaces upon the necks of his own girls, and he gave straw necklaces to Molly Whuppie and her sisters. Well, they went upstairs, and the others were soon asleep. But Molly Whuppie lay there thinking. And then she got up. She took the gold necklaces off of the giant's girls, put them on her own neck and those of her sisters, and gave them the necklaces of... And no sooner had she done that than she heard him downstairs moving about, and here he came, his great giant hand moving over the gold, picked up the straw, hit those girls' heads together, and went away thinking he'd done well. Molly Whuppie said, "Wake up, wake up." The sisters woke up. They made ropes out of the sheets, and then they knocked a hole in the thatched roof. They threw the rope up through it, and they climbed up and down and ran. They ran all night long until in the morning they got to a castle belonging to a king. Now, when the king heard what Molly Whuppie had done, he said, "Oh, Molly Whuppie, you are very clever. But if you'll be even more clever still, you'll go back to the castle of the giant and get the sword of light right over his bed. If you do that, I'll give your eldest sister my eldest son to wed." "Ooh, that sounds rare hard to do, but I'll give it a try," said Molly Whuppie. So the next morning she got up, and she went off to the giant's house all by herself. And she found a hole in a crumbling wall, and she got into the giant's room. And no sooner did she get there when she heard him coming down the hall. So she crawled under the bed. Wouldn't you know it, The giant's hound was there. He lifted a lip at her and gave a snarl. But Molly Whuppie was very clever. She reached in her pocket and gave him some meat, and he licked her face and went to sleep. His great feet, she could see them right under the bed. And he lay down, and the mattress was no more than 1/4 of an inch from her nose. And so the giant began to snore. And when he snored in, the furniture sailed across the room. And when he snored out, it sailed back. Back and forth the furniture went. Molly Whuppie crept out from under the bed, and she saw it, the sword of light right over his head. Now, if she made one false move, the fat would be in the fire and the foot on the path, if you know what I mean. But she was there. She was the only one to do it. So she reached up, and she took hold of that great sword, and she lifted it off of the pegs. Oh, she had it. And she started for the door, walking oh so quietly, oh so quietly, oh so quietly. Meow! She stepped on the cat's tail, was up and after her, and he ran. And she came to the bridge of one hair, just big enough for her to get across, and he couldn't. And he hollered, "Woe with ye, Molly Whuppie, never ye come again." "Twice more will I come to Spain," she cried, waving the sword over her head. Well now, the king was right glad to get the sword of light. And at the reception of her eldest sister's wedding, as they sat eating cake, he said, "Ah, Molly Whuppie, you are very clever. But if you'll be even more clever still, you'll go back and get the purse under the giant's pillow." That sounds rare hard to do, but I'll give it a try, says Molly Whuppie. So the next day she went back to the giant's castle. And she did everything that she'd done before, fed the dog, and got under the bed. And in comes the giant and begins to snore. And the furniture goes back and forth across the room. And then she crawls out. Now there was the purse right under his pillow. If she snatched it out, his head would hit the bed, he would awaken, and she'd have that to do. Well now, what could she do? What would you do? I knew there were others as clever as Molly Whuppie. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a feather, and she tickled the old giant's nose, and he, achoo, sneezed. His head came up off the pillow. She grabbed the purse and started for the door. Oh, so quietly. Oh, so quietly. Eek! She stepped on a board, and the giant awoke, and he was after her. And she ran, and he ran, and she ran, and he ran. And they came to the bridge of just one hair, and she got across, and he couldn't. Woe with ye, Molly Whuppie, never ye come again. Once more will I come to Spain, she cried. Funny that she should say that. When she got back to the castle, the king said, Molly Whuppie, I've never seen anyone as clever as you. But if you will be even more clever still, you will go back and get the ring off the giant's finger. If you will, I will give you my youngest son to wed. Ooh, that sounds the hardest of all, said Molly Whuppie, but I'll give it a try. So back she went. Now, this time when she went to the castle, the giant was already in bed, snoring away, and the furniture sailing back and forth across the floor. As she fed the old hound, he licked her hand, and she looked. There was the giant's hand on the side of the bed, and it was a big one, too. And she saw the ring. She went up to him and took hold of that ring and gave it a tug. But she couldn't get it off. His finger was too fat. what was she going to do? What would you do? I knew it. I know whoppies in the world. That is exactly what she did. She reached into her pocket and brought out some butter that she'd brought from the king's castle, and she greased that giant's finger for a fare-you-well. And then she took hold of the ring and began to slide it. And she slid it and slid it and slid it, and she had it off.
Oh, now I've got you, Molly Whoppy.
And he did, too, right in his big hand. And he said,
Now, if I had done to you what you have done to me, what would you do to me?
For you see, even though giants are big and strong, they have a great deal of trouble thinking. But Molly Whoppy didn't. Oh, she said, I would put me in a bag with the dog and the cat and needle and thread and scissors, hang me on the wall, and beat me till I'm dead.
That's just what I'm gonna do to you, but I don't have a stick.
Well, then, you'll have to go and get one, won't you, man? And so the giant put Molly in the bag, and then he went out to find a stick. And as soon as he had gone, Molly Whoppy cried out, "Ooh, if you could see what I see." And the giant's wife, who'd come in, said, "Oh, Molly Whoppy, you don't see anything in that bag." "Oh, if you could just see what I see." "Now, Molly Whoppy, I know you don't see anything in that bag." "Diamonds and pearls. Oh, if you could just see it, if you could just see it." "Molly Whoppy, let me into that bag." So the giant's wife let Molly Whoppy out. Molly Whoppy put the giant's wife in, and no sooner had she done so and gotten behind the door when here he comes with a stick. And he begins to beat the bag, and the dog barks, and the cat meows, and his wife hollers, "It's me, man!" Well, Molly saw her chance, and she slipped out of the door, but the giant sees her out of the corner of his eye, and he comes after her. And she ran, and he ran, and she ran, and he ran. And they got to the bridge of just one hair, and she got across, and he couldn't. And he hollers,
"Woe worth ye, Molly Whoppy, never ye come again."
And she said, "Never fear, my friend, never more will I come to Spain." She took the ring back to the king, and he gave her his youngest son to wed. They had basketfuls of children, and they were all just as clever as their mother, whose name was Molly Whoppy. This story is a creation story of the Cherokee, and it starts in the beginning. In the beginning, all the world was water and one great rock. Now on this rock there lived an old man who was a storyteller, and a boy and a girl. Only the old man practiced his stories, and the girl and boy played. But as they got older, their arms got longer and stronger, and when they threw the ball, it went off the rock into the water, and they swam out to get it and brought it back. And this they did all day long. That evening they came to the old man and said, "We need more rock." "What?" He was in the midst of his 300th story and didn't want to be interrupted. "We need more rock. When we throw the ball, it goes off into the water." The old man looked at the children, he looked at the rock, and that night, instead of practicing his stories, he thought. In the morning, he went to the edge of the rock, and putting his hands to his mouth, he called all the sea people. "Ha, ha, ha." And they came. They came and came and came. They were all around the rock in a great circle. And then the old man called to them.
As you know, the rock here is our home, as the sea is yours. It is plenty big for me, but the children need more rock to play upon. Do any of you know where we might get something to make more rock?
There was silence, and then the great fish, the oldest one, the wisest of them all, spoke.
It is said that far down at the bottom of the ocean there is a certain clay. If you got some of that, you might make more rock. Well, which of you will go down and get it?
Said the old man. And again there was a silence. And again the old fish spoke once more.
It is too far. If we went down, we would surely die.
The old man looked sad and started to turn and walk away, when a small voice was heard. I'll go down. And turning, he looked, and only the fish closest to the rock could see who it was that spoke. It was the mud turtle. He came crawling out onto the rock. Salagugi, they call him. I'll go down.
Salagugi, did you not hear what the great fish said? He said it was so far down you might die.
Maybe I will. Maybe I won't. I'd like for the children to have more rock to play upon. And without another word, the small mud turtle slid off the rock into the water and disappeared. And they waited. They waited for a whole week. At the end of the week, the fish began to swim away. They waited for another week. At the end of that week, the old one, the great one, the wisest of them all, turned and slowly swam out of sight. At the end of the third week, the old man, the storyteller, slowly walked to another part of the rock and began to practice his stories once more. The children were the only ones who waited. They watched and waited, looking at the very spot where Salagugi had disappeared. At the end of the fourth week, suddenly something dark popped to the surface. They reached out and took hold of the small turtle and brought him in. He was dead, but on the bottom of his feet was the clay. He had found it. The old man came running as fast as he could. He took the clay and made it into 4 small balls, and some he threw to the north, and some to the south, and some to the east, and some to the west. And where it landed, you could see land forever. Land for the boy and the girl and all the rest of us to play upon and travel on. And land for Salagugi with great respect.